Good morning. Happy holidays to all. Okay, if the secretary would take roll call.
Mrs. Labuda.
Here.
Mr. Benson.
Here.
Mrs. Geiger.
Here.
Mrs. Edwards.
Here.
Mr. Sorensen. Mr. Ruiz.
Here.
Mr. Samuelson.
Here.
We have a very light agenda today because two nights ago, and thank you for those who were able to attend the capital budget. Ed spent an hour talking about the needs of our DPW. That'll be addressed, or actually that'll be voted on next week at our board meeting. So having said that, Ed, let's have any reports, and we'll do this last.
Yeah, no, we got our resolutions this month.
Okay. Okay, so first we'll go to the resolutions, then we'll go to Bill Cutler, and then we'll discuss the letter that Ed wants to have some discussion on. Okay, so the first resolution, Ed, is to authorize the county manager to enter an agreement with Hudson Transit Lines for providing transportation.
Motion.
You wanna?
Jean.
Second. Jonathan, you wanna just explain that? Every year we have a...
Yeah,
Want to
this is
explain
an
that?
we have had multiple years with Hudson Transit. They have essentially provided the service that used to be the blue route in Sullivan County, and we supplement them to do so because without it, they're not really going to run the route. They don't find it financially doable in Sullivan County right now. So they run this year-round for us. It runs Liberty, Boulsburg, and Thompson primarily around the college.
Approximately, do you know how many people utilize the route?
I have the exact numbers downstairs if and I can get them to you.
Does the bus fill up or?
Oh, it's in, there's probably, it runs multiple times a day, so some of them may have 50 or 60 passengers down to, you know, just a few and the off hours, but
And they do go to the senior complexes and take them?
I don't know if it's specifically to the senior complexes where they pick up, but
Or do they, where's their station?
short, they come out short line here, they go into Liberty, they go into Fallsburg, and Woodridge to college. Yeah, they do it, that loop that used to be the blue route.
And that all this,
And you
it's
can
advertised,
raise them
all the
down and pick
seniors
them
now.
up.
The Office of the Aging, we're doing a complete overhaul on transportation. I know some of my colleagues have been at those meetings with me because unfortunately, one of the issues with short line is, and it's always they go to the places that they have the most population. It's very difficult to have a short line bus, unfortunately, go out to Jeffersonville. So we're hoping to address that with the grant we just received. And, you know, because it's not fair to the people in Jeffersonville or Lumberland not to have the same service as the people in the town of Thompson. So that's been on the table. We're gonna grade, there'll be 30, 40 people at our meeting. So we're really countywide, we're
Yeah.
gonna really take a good look at that. But that plan is a year or two down the road. But in the meantime, this will provide services, which it has the last couple of years, to those areas that people, has the most amount of, you know, ridership, so.
So, this not to exceed cost, because I can see it from the previous, the 2007. Is this the first time that the contract's being renewed since?
No, it's been renewed annually.
Oh, okay.
We renewed this annually.
last year.
Yes,
So
we did.
At the same amount, are we?
Yeah,
Okay.
we come in, it's actually slightly under by the time we're done with the number of
Yeah.
days that they run, they don't.
So we don't exceed.
Right,
Um,
we haven't exceeded this ever.
So, this has nothing to do with any of the, contracts with, this is just between the county and,
Short line, correct.
For a particular route. It's not like we're obligated to take this many of welfare to work.
No,
or-
absolutely not, there's
Okay.
nothing else on that, that's so that they run these routes for us in this county and essentially replace the blue route
Okay,
that the county used to run.
right,
And,
okay.
I'm sorry, that's the piece that I'm not clear on. Why don't we keep with or bring back the blue route versus go to this system?
It was
As far as cost effectiveness, as far as, I think those routes, if I'm thinking correctly, they were run with a smaller bus, so therefore if you had that, besides the pollution, the amount of people that get on the bus in those places would be less instead of trying to fill a bus with 150 people, which we're not gonna get on a short line bus, and I don't ever see a little short line bus, I only see these big buses
Okay.
like out there now, so
Like I said,
help me understand
this
that
runs
better.
multiple routes. I think there's 8 to 10 routes a day they do, in this loop with buses. We cannot do that for 65,000. We would have the employee,
If we had
cover
two-
the employee
If we had
only,
two
we wouldn't-
employees,
yeah.
That'd be-
you're over the 65,000 right there.
And we wouldn't have the bus, and we wouldn't be able to do that many routes in a day. I mean, financially, this is just supplementing, they can already do it, because they already have buses and everything else. So they're getting a supplement to do this, plus they're getting paid fares. By the time we tried to do this, and this was done before I got involved in, when, planning was still overseeing transportation, they did do studies on that and determined to get out of that, the welfare to work, the other programs that we currently have contracted out, that was all part of those decisions at that time to do this. I know at 65,000, there's no way we would be able to run this system that they're running.
Oh. Well, thank you, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So at 8 to 10 routes a day, do they circulate 8 different locations? 8 to 10 different locations?
Yeah,
Or are
they
they
have
repeating
multiple
routes?
stops. No, it's a, they go around and do the loops, but
Okay,
they
I was
have
just
different
wondering.
times. If you look at their schedule, it's all right on their schedule too. I mean, I can give you it all if you want the actual numbers and the riderships, because that's, they submit that to us, with vouchers, usually
And I'm sure
quarterly.
you looked at it to see if it could be expanded into the areas that have no transportation.
They wouldn't financially be
Oh,
feasible
God.
for them to start running into Lumberland because, and we've talked to them, because they don't have the ridership either at that point. That's the problem with going into the rural areas. That's where we're doing the coordinated transportation plan right now with the group that we're meeting on and trying to study how to address transportation into remote rural counties. That's where it becomes difficult. Ulster County has Poughkeepsie, Kingston, and they run between those. They're major population centers. They still don't have it, say, in Shandaken and Denning. It's not.
Or even
It's-
Ellenville complains that they don't get.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't get it as much because in those areas, there's much less population, so there's much less need for it. You do have some, but a lot more people have their own vehicles if they live in the outlying areas.
Okay, Cora, did you have, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm always amazed when I look at the monthly reports, the scope of what DPW does. It's just kind of mind-boggling. And something that jumped out at me, we were talking about before the meeting started, because it seems like you're also part of a catch-all. If a job is cut in one place, it goes to DPW, and you have to continually stretch the rubber band to take on
Yeah,
something.
we have staff that do that very well, actually, so.
So if we could just zero in for a minute, because it really started to go on my radar screen when we went to Delaware County and saw the way they organized their code enforcement. I mean,
Mhm.
we were visiting the jail, but it just so happened that the code enforcement officer was there. So, under buildings, can you just explain what you were telling me about how the code enforcement inspection happens with losing the person who's retiring in DFS
Well,
and
they-
inspecting these places?
Yeah, we do the
It's
foster.
under buildings. the
Yeah,
first
we do
one.
the foster care home inspections. At one time, DFS had staff that did that. They retired several years ago, and they had done the foster care homes and the hotels, motels that DFS utilizes to place homeless into, and the foster care. They came to DPW and to Dick Martinkovic to assume some of those roles, because we have the county code enforcement officer works under DPW, and Dick Martinkovic under public safety and fire, he also can do inspections. So they gave all the hotel motel inspections to Dick Martinkovic, which he does monthly or whenever they're required to go to. And we picked up the portion of doing the foster care home inspections out of DPW with the county code enforcement officer. So now he goes around on, once a week, we do inspections as required, either new homes or annual re-inspections.
So the county code enforcement officer sits in DPW, that's his
Yes.
full-time job?
Yeah, right now we have a junior buildings engineer who is a certified code enforcement officer.
So he's doing a few things.
Oh, yeah, it's not just this.
I
This
think
is,
an more important question for me is, an update on your deputy position.
Wait,
Can
can
I
I just
wait
finish?
past
my
that?
answer?
Hold on, hold on.
Can the reason I'm going on this line of questioning, I
right.
realize your question's more important, but.
No, but hold on, Cook, I just wanna vote on this resolution for the trans.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then, yes, okay, so all in favor of the resolution one, Mid-Hudson, okay.
6A.
Okay, Cora, go ahead, yep.
Is that it would be worth finding out if the person who's retiring from DFS, who's the,
she was scheduling all our inspections and would go out with our guy to the house. She never did inspections. We did the inspections. She would schedule with our code enforcement officer what needed to be inspected and when.
Okay, so what I'm suggesting is that given the amount of state mandates that the state pushes on us, if it's possible for us to push back just a little bit and see whether DFS has shares the cost, part of the Fed or part of the state, which would alleviate some of the cost on the county. How would we go about doing that? In other words,
Right, Cora.
if that person's function was partially paid for by the feds or the state.
That would probably be a question for DFS, I would think, under them and see what they
'Cause right
get
now it's
under that
100%
program.
county share.
For us,
Yeah.
yes, we don't get reimbursed.
But
under
Cora
that.
brings
We
out a
don't
good point,
those.
they
Yeah.
do that for DSS, why aren't we getting, I mean, I don't know. Sam? What,
The state controller's office, when they were here last spring, suggested, whether or not they will back it up, we don't know, that any of us who do work for DSS, send them timesheets and bill. I'm gonna start doing that in January. My past experience with the state was that if I didn't bill everybody, they wouldn't allow it. The two auditors who were here from the controller's office said, oh no, they'll approve it. So I'm just going to start sending bills up on timesheets to DSS, put in for it, and see if we can get reimbursed for it. I have
Okay.
no way of knowing whether the state will ultimately back up what their two auditors said when they were here, but it's certainly worth a
it's,
try.
yeah.
Do we have it in writing?
I was gonna say,
or
do we,
in-
yeah. Exactly, put it in writing.
He told it to the
Acting
commissioner.
manager has looked into this, so we
Okay.
probably should have that conversation with
Yeah,
him.
where is Josh? Okay.
Because he's been more up on that and that discussion of
Remind me,
we
okay.
won't, and I wouldn't wanna misspeak on something that
Okay.
he's worked
Who
it
So-
out
has
over.
worked on that?
Josh.
Josh has been, we've had conversations about that.
But
and
he's
our
not
direct-
acting anymore. He's county manager.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, his contract's not signed, he's still
Oh,
acting.
okay.
He doesn't know that yet.
Either way, Josh, if.
Well, he's a pretty damn good actor.
We talked about direct bill versus, indirect billing and cost allocations, and I know, he probably could brief you more
Okay.
accurately on the numbers that he was thinking.
Okay, the next okay, any more questions? Cora, any more questions on his report?
I
Can
think
you answer your
it's
question? He
pretty
spoke to the
phenomenal,
commission.
thanks.
And
And
Kitty
I
had,
thank our staff.
Cindy
They're
had,
the-
Cindy, your question?
No, I just wanted an update on your deputy position.
We're still looking, and hopefully we'll be filling it.
Yeah, Ed, I mean, you
in the
gotta
near future.
try to
Yes,
fill that.
I'm trying.
When did that start, that process?
Several months ago.
And so, does it typically take that long? Or was there a holdup that? you didn't
It's
anticipate?
getting applicants in, that's all, that want to take on that
And
position.
you've had a good response?
No.
They define good.
Yeah.
That's right.
You have to define good.
Yeah, no, I want that one filled sooner rather than later, and I'm gonna try another thing here shortly, so. I'm working out with staff to, how we're gonna approach it.
Okay. We want you to have help.
Yeah, and we're trying to fill a couple positions right now, actually, so hopefully we'll have decisions on here shortly.
Okay, the second resolution is to amend the solid waste rules regarding disposal fees. I need a motion. Jonathan, Scott, any questions? Ed, you wanna?
Did we pass it?
The other one we did
Okay.
pass. You're talking.
This is what we briefly discussed last month, and I wanted to give time
Sorensen and,
to look at this. We are currently going to increase from $90 a ton to $95 a ton. That pretty much has been in place, the 90, since we first entered into our contract with IESI for hauling, and at this point, since that time, we have approximately a $5 a ton escalation, fuel escalation. So we're just, that would just cover that, the 90 to 95. We're also looking at changing our minimum fees at the landfill. They're currently $10.80 for a minimum fee. If you drive across the scales, we're gonna increase that to $11.
Now, did you give everybody notice, Ed?
We'll be doing that,
Okay.
notice will be going out. This will take
Okay.
effect, we were looking at January 1st, actually, this should be revised. I
Okay.
would like to do that as part of this to February 1st, just so the haulers have
It
time
is
to
revised. That's right.
notify people.
Well, yeah, 'cause you don't want the haulers to be surprised. They'll start calling us, how come nobody told me? I mean,
hold on a minute.
so
We can
February
amend
first,
this to
mine says February
February
1st at the
1st.
bottom.
I have one here that says January, maybe I
Yours
have
is
an
the
old
old
one.
one.
Okay,
Yeah.
I apologize
Okay,
then,
so-
I have,
Well, maybe the
I have the
haulers-
original one that
Yeah,
went
this
up that
says
we,
February
Maybe the
first.
haulers should
Okay.
surprise us and pay them.
we're also working on that.
I know, I'm just kidding.
As long as we're not raising the bag fee.
No, it is not changing the per bag fee right now. That's not a major, it is, but there's much more tonnage that comes in under scaled in
So there's
municipal
increased
haulers.
revenue with these increases, right?
As long as everybody pays.
Yeah, well, on that $5, we're figuring if we get into the 50, it could be up to $250,000 in that right now.
But when's the,
To cover part of the ISI cost that we have to the contractor right now.
So you're gonna get, everything's gonna be even dollars now, you get rid of all these.
yeah,
changes.
because.
The $10.80, yeah, actually.
But I mean, all the
we
rest,
went
you
through a
put
lot
all
of
these up to
dimes.
even dollars, we can get rid of
Yeah.
pennies and bucks.
Yeah, we're trying to get rid of the, especially the dimes in there, they had rolls and rolls, and I'd have several transfer station operators ask me as I would go in, can we make this an even dollar one way or another, because they're
You were
making
gonna
an
say
awful lot of change.
They wanted to start up a poker game or something.
Okay, all in favor? Okay.
7-0.
Okay,
Don't make
before I
enough
go to
money.
Bill Cutler, I passed around a letter that everybody
Email.
received from Tom Manzi, and Ed received a copy, and Ed just wants to make a couple comments. So Ed, if you wanna just,
Yeah, in reading that, there were a couple statements in there that I just would like to clarify. In particular, that little has been done to properly maintain and fix up the jail. At this point, we are continuing to do maintenance in the jail as needed. We have done some major repairs in that over time at this point. In essence, back as far as 1989, in the more recent past, it was determined that it made sense to build a new jail. It's been in the works since then. We have not been trying to put millions of dollars into a facility that we believe is going to be closed. We are maintaining it and keeping everything functional as best we can, with that as a thought, because utilizing this jail doesn't seem to make sense from a number of points. The age of the facility, even if for whatever reason it was determined to stay at that site, you would essentially have to remove this building. It would have to be torn down. There's, the guard post says how could address one officer watching 6 inmates doesn't make sense in today's day and age. It needs to be updated and modernized, and from a strictly structural standpoint, it has to. The age of it, even our 1958 section, we, as a county, built the 1985 section is built over top of that. So if you take out that 57, you're also taking out the 85, the newest section except for the modulars. This is also another statement, was no mid-level projects were proposed. This falls under the same thing of trying not to send money into a facility that you're planning on replacing, not into the millions of dollars. We will keep it functional. And again, that's another one, a following statement that said, all work may have been stopped in an attempt to let it further degrade. The jail is degraded, we are fixing it, we are continuing to fix it. We are not trying to replace, once again, infrastructure that we think we're going to replace. With the monies we have right now, putting millions into that one instead of millions into a building like this that we are trying to keep, doesn't make a lot of sense. We also, that facility was evaluated by the MRB group of Rochester in 1989 and determined cost effectively would be to build a new facility, even if it was on that site, to tear that building down in phases and rebuild a new facility. So this has been looked at since then, and actually I know that I don't have the who did, but it's been looked at even prior to that as a facility that needed to be replaced.
Kitty?
I appreciate the fact that we do need to find a new facility.
Mhm.
I understand that, especially if you have a one-on-one versus one corrections officer could see more than that. I get that. The piece that I have problems with is just because something's old, you know, Europe, everything there is old, you know, and those buildings are Middle Ages, and for some reason they don't seem to tear down and wipe them all out and build new. I'm not clear why here in America we don't have the same, either we're not maintaining our structures appropriately, or we build poor quality to start with. I'm not sure what the issue is, but if you go to Europe, those buildings are, many of them are ancient, and I'm not talking about just the cathedrals. I'm not talking about the huge stoneworks. I'm also talking about some of the wooden structures, the other structures that they have there, and they just don't seem to do a wipeout. So I'm not an architect or an engineer, but I also know that in China and that area, some of their way of doing things is you're fixing the road up ahead and the road behind you is falling apart because they don't plan on maintaining. So I think that there's a different thought process in countries, and I don't know how to reconcile that, but I'd like to, if we're going forward with a new building, bear that in mind. You know, when it comes to, if we're building it, it shouldn't be built with the idea of it's only gonna last, or the bridge is only gonna last this many years and then it's, you know, I don't get that thought process. And as a person in that building understanding, I would hope that you go forward with that as a piece.
Oh, I
in
think
your
going
thought
forward, we
process.
build it to last as long as
Yeah,
feasible
because-
with the current technologies that we have at this
Because
point.
the current technologies in the Middle Ages certainly weren't tech. You know?
Hal, did you wanna mention anything? Dr.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, you know, as far as the current facility, the problem we're running into as far as doing any type of renovation to make it a more modern facility is that, you know, you got these rectangles where you're boxed in. So even if you went in there and ripped out old cells and tried to create new cells, you still just got the same square footage. So it's not something we can just miraculously turn into a new style dormitory where, or housing pod where one officer can watch 60 inmates. It's just, and like Ed mentioned, you know, your base is, part of it is your 1900 and part of it's your 1957 or 58. So, you know, everything above it, yeah, it might be able to do something with that, but I mean, what do you do with the stuff that's underneath it? It has to be replaced. And just one comment I would like to make, you know, a lot of the legislature and a lot of the public doesn't know what goes on up there every day, which of course that's the way it should be. But, you know, you really should be accommodating, giving these folks an accommodation for what they're doing. If a it wasn't for DPW and their ingenious and creative repairs that they're doing, or, you know, like I like to put it, they're farmer fixes, that place would have been, a lot more, that place would have been shut down a long time ago, and we would be boarding out a whole lot more people. You're talking about locking mechanisms that you can't get parts for anymore. To replace those locking mechanisms would cost millions of dollars. And these folks have the ability to make these parts, which, you know, is not a small feat as far as we're concerned up there in the jail. So these folks have done an excellent job in keeping that place open for us. So it's not that they're sitting back and trying to let this place fall apart. They're doing what they have to do to keep us open.
Yeah, and ultimately, we're all responsible. We're responsible because we fund the DPW, and it's also about a safety issue, so there's a lot of issues there, but Cindy, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I totally agree with Hal said about DPW, but I think all of us sitting here realize that we have to do something with the present jail, whether it's building a new facility or not. My feeling is, I agree with Tom Manza. As legislators, we have to have options. I mean, I understand there was a lot of research and work and plans looked at in the past.
20 years ago.
But we're the legislators that have to ultimately make the decision, 80 million, 40 million, 20 million, whatever the case may be. Now, I don't even, as far as the $80 million plan, there is an option on the table of a $40 million plan, which I happened to stumble on a meeting. I was really impressed. The engineers that were working on that option asked for opinion and input. Department of Corrections was here, tell us what's not gonna work, make recommendations. That has to be, we have to lay that out on the table. That has to be a public meeting. We have to let the people know what we're doing here. 80 million, 40 million.
For the last 2 months, Hal has been meeting, correct me, Hal, with the COC and the GGA group. And after that's all settled, I don't know which way that's gonna go, we will have to have Labella down, because we do have plans in place for the jail that we're supposed to put on the acreage we purchased. All that will be laid out, and yes, the public will be, that'll be a public meeting, but in the meantime, Hal is in meeting with them. Originally, we only gave them 30 days, now it's 2 or 3 months later, correct, Josh? So we're doing our due diligence, we're trying to move this forward as fast as.
Well, that needs to be laid on the table as well, because I stumbled on a meeting, I got to see the plan, I was impressed with it, I thought it was a viable option, half price from 80 to 40. They were willing to listen to any recommendations anybody had, I was there.
Cindy,
So can that be on the table as well?
But Cindy, we're not engineers, that's why Hal is meeting with the GGA group, correct me, Hal, and the COC, because whatever plan we put in place, it must be approved by the COC, and that's what they're doing.
And Corrections was there, and at that meeting, they were okay with everything, they were helpful, they were advising.
That's not true.
So-
That's not true, don't say things
Yeah,
like
wait.
that. That's totally.
They were open to the alternative plan, I was at that meeting.
They were open to sitting down and designing a facility that they would approve.
Making recommendations for
Absolutely.
options. So I'm just
Absolutely.
wondering, that alternative plan, is that gonna be here on the table at some point?
Yes, at some point.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, public meeting.
Going forward with the idea, the plan originally, the $80,000 plan was
78
million.
by the way.
How many years ago was that plan? More than a decade.
No,
Started in
started.
Couple years
2005.
ago, Katie.
2000.
It
About
was
5 years.
120 million, then it went to 80 million at some point.
The 80
Because I'm
million,
Hold on.
just suggesting that technology also has changed and the needs have changed. I mean,
Renewable
in
energy.
Well, and you
the
make it-
original
One at a
plan,
time.
Kitty, you made
in
a
the
good point.
original
Hold on.
plan,
The more you
If
sit
I
and wait, the
could
bigger the bill's gonna be,
continue.
Hal, and then.
if I could continue, okay, in the original plan, if I'm correct, Hal, when you showed me the x-rays and everything else was originally in the plan to happen at the jail, and you don't need to do that now. It's
Correct.
easier and better to take them to the hospital, have the x-ray where it can be read. So there's a lot in that old plan that can be,
Absolutely. The old
Gone.
plan needs to be revised. When we originally went through that plan, obviously it was years ago. You know how x-rays are done now. It's not
Yeah.
like the old-fashioned way.
right, That's what I'm saying, technology, even in
Correct.
5 years, is hugely different.
And nowadays, there's even a company that we can contract with that'll do like the dental service. They'll bring all their equipment in, take their x-ray and leave. So yes, there's things that we need to revamp in that original plan, absolutely.
So the Labella plan was from what year?
We started in 2005, and I don't know, 2007, 2008, we kind of finished most of it.
When were the consultants brought in to review that plan?
10.
Zabatkin was in the middle of their process.
It was 2010.
Yeah, 9 and
Could have been.
They came up with they did some redesigns and value engineering, and it came down to about, I think, the 78 million, which included the land purchase, all the soft costs.
But it also did still include the old x-ray and.
Yeah, that was the old LaBelle plan, so that's
I
the
mean, and that's
78.
just one thing that I know of. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that, with today's technology, could bring it down into a better cost efficiency. Especially if we're looking at things like whatever we're talking about, energy efficiency.
That's
we
huge.
didn't
Cora
know that.
plan, Kenny. Did you, Cora?
Okay, I think that this kind of conversation where it's very reactive, we're reacting to somebody's email. I don't know how many times I've asked for, let's just do this in a logical, systematic way with a timeline. I found out more about the history of the jail from what you just said and as a reaction to this. I'm also not happy with the sort of bitty bits that come out. They're very selective pieces of information, and we're being asked to make major decisions based on very insubstantial piecemeal. I'd like to see this process be more transparent. I'd like to see GGA come and tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the same with Labella or anybody else, but it has to be open and transparent and systematic and logical. I realize that's a lot to ask, but no matter what we do, it's gonna be something that the taxpayers are gonna have to live with for a long time, whatever decisions we make. So that's my request. Make it systematic, make it transparent, make it logical, lay out all the options. Those options can change over time. But until we get all the information in a logical way, we're just gonna be having these reactive conversations.
Scott?
I think it is being done right now in a logical way. The group has been brought in, and the original plan is that the sheriff and Hal would review the process with the architects, and Ed McAndrew is a part of that, so making sure that it's going to be up to code and whatnot. That has to be done by that small group of people before the plan is brought to the legislature. The legislature cannot be involved on a minute to minute. This has gone through how many different iterations at this point? They came in, it changes daily. But they've got to get to something where the sheriff is comfortable with it, where the architect is comfortable with it, where our DPW is comfortable with it, and ultimately that we are comfortable with it.
Well, so you have any objection to having a timeline going forward, saying by the end of January, we intend to have this?
Well, this was supposed to happen at the end of October.
Right.
And we passed the second deadline because the architect keeps asking for more time.
It's
And
not us, Cora.
in the name of seeing that we could save some money, we've been allowing him to do that. And this is just an exploratory piece. This won't even be the full plans when we're done with this part of it. They would then have to go on and develop the plans if we decided to move forward. So when that happens, and that should happen, we should get the final
Everybody knows where I stand.
determination by the end of this month. Probably the first part of January, we're gonna have them come in and meet with the committee and then come to the full legislature if everybody is in agreement that it's a plan that could go forward.
Well, is there an objection to saying by the end of January, we expect to do this, by the end of February, we expect to do that?
Cora?
Well, there is, because it could change.
Yeah, but
But we
We
gave
did it already
GGA
once.
30 days, but like Scott just said, they wanted more time, so we should tell them now that we're not gonna give them more time?
no,
It's
but that
not
doesn't mean
us,
that at the end of 30 days, we jump off a cliff.
but we're not, we're allowing them to have more time so that they can present their plan.
I don't get a sense that we have an overall direction that we're going in. I have a sense that we're getting pulled in a lot of different directions.
Well, we've kind
No,
of-
this particular
it's
piece, I believe, is
pending
moving
until
forward.
GGA can kind of come up with a workable plan. We've kind of are in a holding pattern
Right.
until that is
But
finalized.
Labella is still on the table.
Well, we've
Yeah.
talked to them, and they, obviously, that we've notified them about this process, and they're willing to just sit and wait for whatever comes of this process. So
Okay,
until
so
this,
I
we're,
get that we don't know what
we
the
don't,
outcome of the
until this
process
is completed,
I get it.
you're in
Yeah, yeah.
we're in a holding pattern.
I mean, Cora,
What?
it's unrealistic for them to believe that we could design a jail in 30 days.
For who?
For this GGA group. I think their intent was, in the beginning, is that we're gonna bring to Sullivan County plans that we use out west, and we're good. Well, the state of New York has a lot of different rules than other states. So that's where we've run into the problem, is that things that were acceptable in their plans in the Midwest or the West are not acceptable here. And so basically, we're building a jail from the ground up. We're designing a jail, excuse me, from the ground up. So that's where all these that's why we can't meet all these time limitations, because we gotta keep going back and revising a few things here and there. Because they can't
I
use.
understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that as far as I'm concerned, when you're planning something that's bricks and mortar like this, you do have a sense of where you wanna end up. And that's the thing that I keep getting, is that this has been going in fits and starts. We start in one direction, then we go in another direction. I don't get a sense that we're all moving in the same direction at the same time, and this is a big project. So I just, I just don't like this kind of reactive nature. It's just.
I understand.
And it's just me.
Alan and then Ed.
I think it would be helpful to have a presentation that kind of provides a chronological history of all the steps that we've taken to get to this point. I know.
We'll do it again, we've done it.
I know,
We'll do it again,
I
yeah?
know,
Okay.
we've done it,
We'll
but
do it again.
Handed it
because
out
the-
about 3 months
Yeah,
ago.
you've
I
had it.
understand that, but
Well, you and I,
the
okay.
questions seem to keep coming up like, how come we selected the site? There's a whole site selection process
That's
that the
what
county
years.
went through, and I think unless you go through that presentation again and perhaps have it as a PowerPoint, to show how we got to that point, those questions are gonna keep coming up. It seems like month after month, the question keeps coming up, or why can't you just use the jail? I think from my standpoint, the jail is obsolete.
Fine.
And I think we do need to construct a new facility, so I've reached that decision in terms of my decision tree. I'm hoping everyone around this table has reached that decision, otherwise we're gonna be stuck at the
Going
debate
back
of,
to square one
do we
again.
put more,
I think we've all come to that same conclusion. We
Okay.
just all have different ideas as to how to get there.
understood. So that's at least one step in the process that there seems to be consensus on that, we're not gonna be able to repair the old jail. We gotta build a new facility. So, the next big issue, the next step in that process, I think the legislature has already made on the site selection, but that issue keeps coming back, so I think it would be helpful to have a presentation that
we'll do that
explains how
next
you got
month.
there and why you chose the
Eh,
site.
And in all due respect, if the same body was here like from 2 years ago, we just would be moving forward with LaBella, because Al and I, this group spent 2 to 4 years on the plan, the site. We didn't do this overnight, it took us years, and we did research. I wanted to have LaBella to come before this group, but if you remember, GGA came before us, and we said we would allow them to have the opportunity. We're gonna let them do the due diligence, but at some point, we're gonna have to move forward. So
my
next,
understanding, that's the only option, other than the LaBella plan. We have LaBella and we have Goldberg. There's no other
Go ahead,
option.
Ed.
Just one thing, we selected LaBella through an extensive
2 years.
request and solicitation on how you selected them. If you decide to go with a different option and you decide not to use LaBella, I think from a procurement standpoint, you will have to go through a
Yep.
solicitation process once again. That means Goldberg could submit, but it's not as if you can just terminate your agreement with LaBella and hire
If
GGA.
that's the option we decide to go through, we'll go through that at that time, right?
Right, but that will be something that has to be done. It's not as if, okay, they
Okay,
came
yeah.
in and now you have the job at this
You
point.
can't just, it has to be.
That's fine.
That can only be to the county's benefit.
Right,
I'm sorry, what did?
right.
I didn't
It
hear.
can only be to the county's benefit
Right.
to go through that process.
That's right.
It's
Of
gonna
course.
result in a lower price.
If it's gonna
Right,
result in a
absolutely.
lower price, without a doubt.
Right, absolutely a good idea anyway. Really, I don't know what the time frame would be on something
Alan,
like that.
Alan,
What
I think
will
one other-
actually wind up happening, just so you know, you're not gonna, let's assume you decide that you like what the Goldberg Group finally does. We're not gonna take their plans
Nope.
and put them out for RFP. What you're gonna do is take the specifications that result in their plans in terms of square footage, what you incorporate, et cetera, and you're gonna put that out for an RFP. And you may get a different architectural rendering of those, meeting those same specifications, which could be less money.
Okay,
You're not putting out a set of plans.
Or it could be
Point-
It could be more money.
Point of order.
And it
Point
may
of
last
order.
15 years.
Point
Hold
of
on.
order. Mr. Sorensen has the
I
floor.
saw his hand up and he could, wait a second, I told him, give me a
Thank
minute,
you,
so,
Jane.
thank you, Sam.
Now I just need
Alan?
a moment to collect my.
That's
my thought
fine.
was. I do
Robert's
think-
Rules of Order.
I do think that we need to keep in mind, you know, this is a major project, it's gonna be very expensive, and it's something that we're gonna have to bond the money for. Right now, the rates are at historical lows. They're not gonna stay there forever. So I do think we need to move forward, not that that should be driving our decision, but we need to move forward with that in mind. And I think there does need to be some type of time frame on this. It can't just go on indefinitely. I think we need to move forward methodically, reach some conclusions, and then come up with a game plan on moving forward.
So do we want to give GGA a time frame? Now that we're back to that, because actually that's.
I think the
big.
project manager needs to give out an overall time frame based on, you know, the laws of gravity. We live on planet Earth. You know, how you do your projects going forward is something you do all the time. Your engineers do it all the time. And, you know.
And normally, yeah, right now we're in something that's kind of unusual in most of our projects in that we're better than halfway through a design. And we were asked basically to stop that and give someone else opportunity to come in. So right now where my time frame would be how long the desire is to let them have inside of that, if I were to look at it that way. When, under a normal process, if we had the other consultant working full-time, yes, we'll give you, you're this far along, you should be without anything majorly going wrong, complete by such and such a date, and that's, we were in that process when that became suspended. So this one is simply a matter up here, how long you all desire to allow this to go, not allow this to go on, but to give this consultant time to come up with an alternate plan. At which case, if you accept, then if that's the desire of the legislature at that point, that they want to do a new solicitation for a new consultant, then we'll go into that process and give you timelines on that also.
Because the way we did the radio interoperability project was we said, okay, from point 0 to where we are now.
Correct.
This is how long it took to get here. In order to go forward, we have, you know, then the kind of road converge, you know, diverts. If you go down this road, it's gonna take this amount of time. If you go down that road, it's gonna take that amount of time. But that to me seems like a logical project management way to go, and getting a sense of, you know, putting in what Sam said. If you go at this point, this road converges here, and you can, you know, speculate that out till infinity. But at some point, you know, the project management part of it is what's the driver, is the engine. And we have to look toward that project management side of it to get a sense of, you know, if we're gonna bond, we have to bond X amount by when, and what the implications of those things are. So that all these gears are meshing and going in, you know, a systematic way.
Well, hopefully that'll all be done, right? That'll all be done.
Hold on. To piggyback on what Cora's saying, if I go back to what you had said the other day, the cost of asphalt doubled in a year or 2 years. So I do believe that we need to move forward in a real direction, whether that's reviewing what they had said and how we chose, and then quickly, do that as a recap, and then just move, this guy has this guy says that, because the $40 million project, if we take them and, we
I
do
need
that.
to interrupt you,
40
Kitty,
million,
for a
yeah.
second, because we don't have a $40 million
yeah.
project.
I'm just using the number,
Just so you
because the
understand.
reason why I'm saying it is, even if we did,
Mhm.
if we waited 5 years, that number,
Well,
just
without a
because,
doubt, you're
would
100% right.
change, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's really pretty vital that we decide, okay, let's recap where we were, now this is the 2 options, let's go with one,
And
go that way.
that's exactly what we're going to do, but right now we don't have a second option.
Right.
We're almost done with that. Hal has given his final comments. GGA has now worked on those. We will get together as a committee to review them to make sure that Hal and Ed and the architect are in agreement. Then it will come back before the legislature. And now the piece that Cora is or Alan is referring to is probably a valid piece, and that is just doing that timeline. This is where we came from and how we got to here, and now we have these 2 projects to assess.
Okay, Alan
And then
and
we need to
Sam.
move on from there.
With
Alan?
that, I drew this
Yay.
really nice elaborate decision tree diagram. I'm being somewhat
good, Alan.
Give it
facetious,
to Ed.
but the first question we asked was, does the jail have to be replaced or not? And I think the decision was it needed to be replaced. And the next question was, do we replace it on site or do we select a new site? Next decision that was made is that it needed to be a new site. Once we made that decision, we looked at, 9 or 10 different sites and went through that analysis, and then we selected a site. And now we're at the point, I think we're down here, but we may backtrack and end up back at the beginning. I hope not, but now we're at the point of, what do we build on that site?
Okay.
So,
That's where you're a
that-
planner.
but those are I can just tell you, those are the steps that have been, decisions that have been made so far.
Right.
So.
we have the site, now the question is what we're gonna build
Maybe
on
we
it.
could put something
Sam?
like that together.
Yeah, I'll just add one last piece, because some
There's
of you have been
probably some
asking, how did we get to where we were? A number of years ago,
I understand
there was such a pressure to get the site
Yeah.
and get it more rapidly, because they wanted to do the jail immediately. And then all of a sudden, when the financial
The economy.
stress hit, everything
Now we're
stopped.
on
So what you really have here is not so much fits and starts, as it was on a fast track, and then everything stopped, because there was no way you were gonna bond.
When we were laying people off, correct.
Keep asking these questions.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so next month, Josh will do a presentation, and we'll go back to you did a couple months ago, you'll have a handout, is how we got.
Timeline, the
The timeline, how we got to where we're at. And, hopefully GGA, I mean, at some point, we're gonna have to give them a time frame and then just move on.
Well, I think this body
I think-
should make that decision,
Okay.
do we give them?
So how much time you wanna give
January is the final deadline,
Cora?
by the end of January,
What?
we need a final
What do you
decision.
ask?
The original
How do we
design
know
was
how much time to give them if we don't know where they are along the process?
But that's why we have the engineers
I think
and
we should have them
planners and
come in and do a
architects.
public presentation and get the option on the table, then we can go from there.
They're not ready.
But they
They're
don't
not
have an
ready.
option
They
to
don't
put
have
on the
one to
table
put
yet,
on
as
the
soon as the option is there, it will come
Then,
to the
right.
table.
Right.
I can
And
tell
I'm
you from
saying that there should-
experience
that should be in January.
If you don't, I don't know what the deadline needs to be, but at some point, you need to set a deadline
Yeah.
because it's just human nature.
Well, and
You
that's
give
up
me
to
6
us.
months to do it, it'll take 6 months.
That's up
get
to
it
us
done.
to set that deadline. Whatever we decide, that's the deadline.
Hold
Spend
on,
the last 48
hold
hours
on,
doing
Hal?
nothing else
Exactly.
You know, you're talking about these deadlines and these timeframes, but, you know, you need to keep in mind that you're trying to get the GGA group and myself and the commission to design a jail in 30 or 60 days that the original plans took years to accomplish. So, I don't know how we get there that quick.
Well, we're not gonna rush this decision, so we'll do it when
Well,
it's
we have
ready.
this site, we need to know where the site, what we're gonna build. Ira?
I agree with what Hal just said. And I think we, in looking at how we got from here to here, if we just look at the last 3 or 4 months, not the last 7 or 8 years, for the purpose at least of this discussion, this group came in and said, we can build this jail at less money. And everybody said, well, we don't know if you can, why don't you give us an outline?
When you
They
say
said-
this jail, you're talking about the Labella
The
plan?
jail
Or
that we
a
want.
jail.
No,
A
the
jail.
jail that we want, that Hal and his cohorts, you know, his colleagues are giving instructions on designing.
I prefer the first choice.
Yeah.
Slip of the tongue.
No, nothing wrong with cohorts.
Absolutely. It's a
In any event,
medieval term.
The original idea was take 30 days and give us an outline, not the kind of detail that they've ended up in. So the fact that it's taken longer, I believe, has been by mutual decision. It's not just because one party is not moving as quickly as they should have. What we're gonna end up with, whether it's later this month or next month, is a very detailed report that's gonna be pretty close to a response to an RFP eventually. And I'm glad Hal's agreed with me, and because it gives us a realistic picture as to whether we're gonna be happy and the state's gonna be happy, which is, or are the criteria here. So that's what's going on here now, and like Hal said, we've taken 3 months. LaBella's been on board for 7 or 8 years. So I think the process is not something we should be upset about right now. Other than transparency, that's a different issue.
Well, I like Alan's, you know, that fits my way of thinking, is that you have these decision points,
Right.
and you know at what point you have to make these decisions, and what the cost implications are gonna be in advance. You guys can't turn around a bond overnight either. You take, what, 3 or 4 months, or you want a bond once a year, or all of these gears have to mesh, and I just, you know, I just wanna see a more proactive, less reactive approach. That's just my personal view, and just from what you wrote on this paper and what Ed says he can deliver, I think it's just straight project management.
Okay, Bill Cutler,
Yes.
you're up. Good morning.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Our November recycling tonnage is 245.88 tons and a revenue of $6,978.84. Those numbers are a little bit light. We're going to shift some of that tonnage and revenue into December. We missed sending out some shipments in November.
Excuse me, can you repeat the revenue number again, please?
Yes, the revenue number is $6,978.84 for
Thank you.
November 2015. Our total year-end revenue is projected above $312,671. So that's definitely a bit above last year's total. Our tonnage appears to be about in line from last year. So we've seen a price increase, but we've seen a leveling off of our material collection. That remains to be seen. We'll have final numbers in January for you there.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that perhaps the amount of recyclables in the waste stream is remaining constant. That could be due to lighter packaging materials, people throwing less material into their recycling bins. As materials get lighter and manufacturers package less, the amount of recycling available
Goes down.
increases.
So isn't that your ultimate goal, that, you know, less of
With
that
benefits
gets
as a
diverted?
Ultimately, absolutely.
No, it's a
The
16.
gold standard is to see waste reduction become the big picture, and
Right.
recycling and waste disposal become a smaller component of our overall waste stream. If we had nothing to manage, zero materials, we would have a zero net climate impact as well. But those days are coming. They're far in the future, but we're starting to see some trends now with lighter packaging materials. Recycling is still good, but we're getting the low-hanging fruit now, and we're seeing an increase in that revenue for the materials we do manage.
And are we doing any better with the composting side of the equation?
As of right now, we still have a lot of decisions to discuss about composting, siting. Do we promote backyard composting, which is a low-cost solution to that equation as well? And we are doing that. There's been tons of interest with respect to backyard and industrial composting in the county. The college is holding a task force meeting next week to discuss a countywide composting project as well with one of their students. So there are some moves in the right direction with composting.
And since we don't meet till after January, can you tell everybody what to do with their Christmas tree?
Absolutely. We have a long-standing program to reclaim your old Christmas trees. If you don't have
Gee, your
access
mind's
to
always
a
in the
big
gutter,
backyard,
stop.
bring your trees down to our landfill site, and we will chip them out and use them as mulch in our county parks.
Now, is
No
that
charge.
advertised, do we do some advertisement on that so people know to bring
We'll
them to?
have a press release
Okay,
coming out.
great.
Absolutely.
Great.
Lastly, we held, actually, 2 more quick items. We held a prescription task force meeting with all county physicians last night at Bethel Woods, specifically to give them the information and empower them to look at instructing their patients with ways to, don't just flush those meds down the toilet, bring them to a permanent drop facility like our new drop facility at the Fallsburg Police Station. You can bring prescription medications, controlled substances to that drop box 24/7, no questions asked. You can bring over-the-counter medications, believe it or not, aspirin tablets and other medications, cough syrups can be brought, cough drops can be brought in, as well as even illegal substances to that facility. So if you're a parent, if you find something your kids shouldn't be using and you snatch it from them, and you need a place to properly dispose of those materials, bring them to the Fallsburg Police Department, no questions asked, you can drop them safely. That task force is continuing, and I know you guys are going to have additional updates from Public Health Services and Emergency Management. There's lots of good stuff happening on that front. Lastly, an article came to our attention this week, published in Environmental News Network, regarding infantile exposure to environmental lead and a possible, and this is very preliminary research, causality between late onset Alzheimer's. There's now 3 studies published showing a link over the last 10 years between very low levels of lead exposure in infants in primates and long-term exposure or development of Alzheimer's disease. This is very leading edge research, but if anyone would like a copy of the articles here, please contact me afterwards. It's compelling, it's kind of leading edge, and from a health standpoint here in the county, it's also important for our hazardous waste collection events. This is a way to get this stuff out of circulation. Whether or not it causes these long-term impacts or not, we can clean up our environment, keep people safe. We're doing a great job.
Well, Bill, can I just ask you a question about
Sure.
that? I know at one point, I understand Sullivan County has a lead clinic where they screen children for lead.
They do.
And if it's to a certain level, then they refer them to the pediatrician for, medication to clean the system out. Is there anything there, is it a health risk to adults? Because at one point, I know when I was working for public health, there was a warning on certain things like Christmas lights coated with lead from, imported from other countries, children's jewelry, costume jewelry, things like that. Does that report address anything like that? Or is it focused on adult or children, infants?
This study only takes a look at very early exposure of lead in infants, and the study was done with a very small number of macaques, which are monkeys. And from a laboratory standpoint, this study really doesn't prove anything yet, but it kind of points researchers in a direction of concern. There's really no acceptable safe level of lead exposure to humans at any age. So any contact with it whatsoever should be avoided.
And the problem is that in your shopping centers, they sell products from other countries that have components of lead. A child's fishing pole will have a little warning on it. Wash your hands after you touch this product because it could be contaminated with lead. So I'm thinking now that it probably should be an alert, maybe through public health or something, public service announcement to read these labels, especially parents that are buying kids' toys.
Right.
Especially at Christmas time.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I know the New York Public Interest Research Group,
NIPERG,
has some publications about lead exposure in toys.
Could
and
you
they
send
are
me that
super-
before?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
NIPERG has it, EPA has it, the
Definitely.
DEC has it.
They sure do. The purpose that I bring this to your attention now is because the items that we collect in our household hazardous waste events each year, even though it's a costly program, this is a way to safely get those chemicals out of circulation and avoid any unintended exposure of kids and adults across
Oh,
the
you really
spectrum.
don't know what has lead in it?
Unfortunately not.
You really don't?
There's a lot of stuff out there that may. But certainly items like lead paint in your basement or garage, that may have been stored. Those are opportunities. Get those cleaned up, bring them into the hazardous waste events that we hold each year, and that slowly over time diminishes the availability of this toxin in the environment, and it will keep us safer. If we can hopefully prevent late onset disease from exposure early in life, we're doing a great thing. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Thanks again, and enjoy the holidays.
One of the reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire, my friend.
Okay, any questions for Bill? Bill, thanks for the report, I appreciate it. Any other questions for Bill? Ed, did you have anything else on your agenda? Any public comment? Ken?
Something that Kitty brought up. The difference between Europe and the United States is we got this philosophy of lowest cost, lowest bidder. In Europe, like they do with our highways, you bid on how long the road is going to last, and that's how it gets built. And there's a total different philosophy between them and us, that one. As far as lead, There used to be a show on AMC. There used to be a man who worked for the DEC. He found in Crows. He worked for Ward Stone. He was an American Indian who worked for the DEC for a very long time, and I guess he was too vocal, and they figured out he couldn't sleep in his office working more than 8 hours on a project, so they got him out of office. But one of his biggest concerns was jewelry at the time, and still may be out there, that really was that you could find at fairs, you can find it in a dollar store. They look cute, they're heavy, they're pure lead, and kids would swallow a piece of that and die. And you know, we're not very good at controlling things coming into this country.
Yeah.
So you know, you got to be very, very much aware of that.
I'm still using lead pencils.
You know, they were lead, they're
Well,
bad.
if you can figure out something else to use in those pencils, you make $1 billion.
Thanks, Ken. A motion to adjourn?